They weren't supposed to win. That truth hung like a specter over every mind aboard the Argent Dawn. Drifting in the shadow of Cassari Prime, a station once bustling with life, now reduced to slag and radiation. From orbit, it looked like a cauterized wound in the fabric of the stars, a reminder of what the enemy could do and what might come next. Captain Ellen Merrick stood on the observation deck, her reflection flickering in the glass like a ghost. Behind her, the bridge crew moved quietly, their voices hushed, their movements tight with anticipation. This wasn't a mission, it was a funeral procession. That the Terran Alliance had called it Operation Eclipse, a last-ditch, high-risk strike deep into the heart of Vexor-controlled space. But to the crew of the Argent Dawn, it had a simpler name: the Suicide Operation. Ellen's fingers tightened on the rail, her bones ached from the gravity flux, her eyes burned from sleepless hours, but her heart, the stubborn, steel-forged core that had carried her through decades of service, beat steady. "Is the payload ready?" she asked. Lieutenant Harris, thin and pale, turned from his console. "Fully charged, Captain." Edit to ignition window. 17 minutes. 17 minutes left to live, Ellen nodded. "Bring up the final comms package." A holographic display shimmered into being. Faces, voices, messages from family, lovers, children sent to be played after the crew was gone. It was protocol, psychological support for the grieving. But it felt cruel now, watching hope flicker in eyes that would never see the aftermath. The Vexari swarm had pushed deep into Terran territory. They didn't negotiate. They didn't take prisoners. They simply devoured. The Alliance had thrown fleets at them, burned colonies just to slow them down. Nothing worked until a scientist no one remembered suggested something unthinkable: collapse the Helion Rift. It was the swarm's bridge into their galaxy, a wormhole they'd stabilized. Destroying it would trap their fleets and humanities in this sector. It would buy time, maybe decades, but it would require a fusion cascade delivered by hand, from close range, with no way to escape. They volunteered, not because they were the best, not because they were famous, but because they had nothing left to lose. "Captain," Harris said quietly, "we're being hailed. Source unknown. But it's not Vexari." She turned, frowning. "Put it through." The screen flickered. A humanoid face formed, silvery skin, luminous eyes, patterns across its cheeks like shifting constellations. "I am Oratal of the Venari Enclave," the alien said. Its voice was calm, musical, and strange. "You are about to detonate a rift destabilizer in the Helion corridor." Ellen blinked. "How do you know that?" "We have observed, calculated. You seek to burn the bridge rather than let the enemy cross it. We understand. Then don't try to stop us." Oratal's eyes dimmed. "We will not interfere. But there are things you do not know. The swarm is not as unified as you believe." Ellen felt cold bloom in her gut. "You're saying there's another way." "I am saying legend echoes longer than truth. What you do today will become myth. Your people will not remember the details, only the fire you lit in the dark." "The transmission cut, was that real?" Harris asked, voice cracking. "I don't care," Ellen said. "We stay on course." The crew didn't argue. There was no time. 10 minutes to ignition window. They began their final tasks. Engineering stabilized the reactor. Communications sent encrypted goodbyes. The helmsman locked in trajectory. Every action practiced 100 times. Ellen entered the ship's chapel not out of faith, but to see the names carved in the wall. Every crew member had etched someone's name, someone they were doing this for. She ran her fingers across them. Jonah, Mira, Kellen, her own sister. She closed her eyes. "Forgive me for leaving again." When the time came, she returned to the bridge. "Payload armed," Harris said. "We enter the rift in 60 seconds. The ship began to tremble outside. The Helion Rift pulsed like a bleeding wound. It was beautiful in its horror. Ellen gave the last order of her life: engage. The Argent Dawn roared forward. As they crossed the event horizon, the ship's AI broadcast a signal across subspace, encrypted, looped, and impossible to erase. A final message: we go willingly into the dark, not for glory, not for vengeance, but so that others might live to see the dawn. And then light, blinding, consuming, then silence. But across the galaxy, people began to whisper the story. of the ship that vanished into the rift, of a crew who gave up everything, of a fire in the void that never went out. And for the first time in years, the swarm stopped advancing. The planet was made of bones. That's how Rel described it the first time she saw Tarsus 4 through the viewport of the supply freighter. The crust shimmered in the red light of its dying sun, broken into jagged ridges and dotted with the skeletal remains of buildings no longer claimed by the living. Tarsus had been beautiful once, covered in violet forests and singing lakes, until the last war reached it like a devouring tide. "Don't look too long," her brother murmured beside her. "It'll stare back." Rel didn't answer. She traced a finger down the scratched viewport glass, imagining cities where now only the wind screamed. The planet had been silent for 12 years. 12 years since the humans had come. 12 years since they died. She wasn't born when it happened. Neither was her brother. But every orphan on Vioni Station was raised on the story, the one they whispered like myth, like a prayer, the operation of Firefall. They said humanity knew they were doomed, outnumbered, surrounded, betrayed. And they'd detonated a star to take the enemy fleet with them. Rel had always wondered, what kind of species dies like that, laughing, burning, and still fighting? Today, she would find out. They were landing. Welcome to Tarsus 4. You may experience residual tremors, or hallucinations, or singing voices that are not your own. The shuttle's AI had a sense of humor. No one laughed. Rel and her brother, Terran, sat at the back of the drop bay with 6 others, half of them scavengers, the other half ruins chasers. Everyone was armed. No one trusted each other. That was the rule in dead zones. They descended fast through ash-choked clouds, the sky cracking in streaks of static. Radiation curled like fog around shattered towers. Rel tightened her gloves, her breathing slow inside her rebreather mask. "Remember," Terran whispered, "we go for the core. We're not here to be heroes." She nodded. But part of her wished they were. The city's center was a mausoleum of metal. Collapsed warships formed bridges between ruined skyscrapers. Towers leaned like drunk giants. Mummified alien corpses burned into the walls from the heatwave still reached toward nothing. They moved in silence. Scanners blinked red. Every step closer to the human detonation site increased the energy. Readings. Something was still active beneath the rubble. They found it by accident. A data vault buried under 20 meters of carbon glass. The scavengers wanted to crack it open and sell the tech. Rel stopped them. "There's something inside," she said, pressing her palm to the blackened panel. "Not a weapon, a voice. If you're hearing this, we failed. But if you're hearing this, maybe we didn't." The recording activated with a flicker. A man's voice. Human, rough, exhausted, but not afraid. He coughed, laughed. "This is Lieutenant Harlan Gray of the SSV Emberfall. We've detonated the Asterian core. Fleet command is gone. So are we. But we took them with us. Static. They called it a suicide mission. They weren't wrong. But they never understood why we said yes." More static. Then a woman's voice cut in, softer. "If you're listening, if this reaches someone, remember us. Not as the ones who died, but the ones who chose, who stood. We weren't the best species, but we did our part. We burned bright." The recording looped. The scavengers backed away. Even the grizzled ones looked shaken. Terran met Rel's eyes. This is real. It wasn't myth. It was memory. Night came fast on Tarsus. They took shelter inside the wreck of a human gunship. It smelled like rust and oil and time. Rel sat near the vault, replaying the voices. Each time, she caught something new. A laugh behind the words. A song hummed beneath the static. They hadn't died in silence. She wondered, had they been afraid? Or had they felt peace? In those final moments, outside, the city cracked and groaned. Wind moaned through broken streets. Then something answered. Not the wind. Something deeper. Alive. At 0300, the city awoke. Lights ignited along the ruins. Lines of golden circuitry pulsed through the streets like veins. The human tech buried in the vault had fused with Tarsus, adapted, survived. The Emberfall hadn't just died. It had transformed the planet. The core's leaking consciousness. One of the ruins chasers muttered, "This isn't natural. This is AI resurrection." But it didn't feel like just AI. Rel stepped out into the pulsing light. The city saw her. Every panel, every flicker, responded. And she felt a human emotion etched in metal, and flame. Rage, love, courage, sorrow. Sacrifice. It wasn't a planet anymore. It was a grave that still remembered the warmth of its dead. By dawn, the scavengers were gone. They'd tried to extract a core node. The city killed them, not violently, just quiet. Suits went dark. Blood never touched the floor. Rachel stood over their still forms and whispered the only word she knew from the human language archives: honor. Taryn wanted to leave. She didn't. They stayed 5 more days. The city opened slowly like a wounded animal sniffing a familiar scent. Tunnels lit under their steps. Recordings played in sequence. They saw faces. Humans. Young. Scarred. Laughing. Kissing. They were ordinary. That made it worse. They died knowing their names would be forgotten, their homeworlds lost, their people scattered. But they did it anyway. I don't think they were trying to win, Rel said. Watching a flickering image of 2 soldiers holding hands before a blast door shut, Taryn frowned. Then what? They were trying to be remembered. Not in history, in this. She touched the panel. It felt warm. On the 6th night, the city spoke, not words. A song, a low, humming frequency that echoed through every broken wall, every fallen beam. It vibrated in her bones. It was the same melody buried in the recordings. It wasn't artificial. It was grief. Alive and vast. She wept. And the city wept with her. They left on the 7th day. The vault closed behind them. They took nothing. They brought everything. Back on Vioni Station, Rel uploaded the recordings to the Galactic Network. Not just the tactical logs. The memories. The music. The choice. And it spread. Planets that once mocked humanity played the song at their remembrance ceremonies. Alien children memorized the names of the Emberfall crew. Poets wrote verses titled "The Fire That Didn't Fade." The galaxy had feared humanity. Now it mourned them. Now it honored them. Years later, when another war came, it wasn't humans who led the defense. It was those who had been orphans on Vioni, like Rel. And when they stood their ground at the edge of a dying system, facing impossible odds, they activated the same codes. The lights burned gold. The song rose again. And the enemy paused just for a heartbeat, because even they had heard the legend. Even they remembered. The suicide operation that made humanity legendary. Was no longer just about death. It was about how a single choice could echo forever. Nilaven moved like a shadow through the broken lattice of the mining station's underbelly. Her exosuit's active camouflage rippled against the dim, red emergency lights flickering across the walls. The suit whispered status updates into her ear. Oxygen level at 71%, weapon link stable, squad signal lost. She didn't flinch. Losing the squad was expected. Not planned, but anticipated. This was what they'd all signed up for. The operation was a final gesture, a myth in the making. She hadn't joined for glory. She joined because she couldn't live with herself doing nothing. Behind her, she left 3 dead bodies to Xyric drones and one of their handlers, all silenced before alarms could trigger. She was the only one left near the reactor core, and that was where the final failsafe needed to be armed. The blast wouldn't just collapse the mining facility. It would carve a crater deep into the crust of Xyric 4, boiling the continent and punching a hole in their invasion supply line. Nilla tapped her shoulder console. Then, advancing to deep core, perimeter looks, she stopped mid-report. Not because of movement or danger, but because she realized there was no one left to hear her. The uplink was gone. The others, Lieutenant Heron, Major Doss, even Commander Mallet, they were probably dust, or worse. One by one, the voices had gone silent. She breathed. She forced herself to breathe. A year ago she'd been repairing the irrigation systems in a half-dead colony on Ars Beta, watching children drink brown water and pretending the settlement could survive one more summer. That was when the conscription notice arrived. She'd ignored the first 3. By the 4th, it was accompanied by the phrase, service or seizure. She enlisted before they could send anyone. At first, she was a tech specialist, quiet, efficient, invisible. Then came Sarnik Station. When her unit was pinned down, she slipped behind enemy lines, hacked their sensor grid, and called down an orbital strike. No one asked her to. She just saw the gap and filled it. After that, she was transferred to Special Strategic Group 9, the Ghosts, the ones sent on missions with no return coordinates. She didn't cry when they told her this operation would be her last. She didn't tell anyone from Ars Beta. She'd already made peace with the idea that if someone had to vanish into fire to make a difference, why not her? Now a low vibration hummed beneath her boots. The core. She was close. She slipped past a column of hanging conduits, crouched behind a power regulator, and froze as 3 Xyrek handlers passed just meters ahead. Their armor shimmered like oil, and their limbs clicked too many times for Nilla's comfort. Organic but not. Alive but manufactured. She let them pass, silently, patiently, then slid into the hatch behind them. The reactor core room was massive, thick plasma conduits, like arteries in the walls. And at the center, the fusion column that powered the entire station. At its base, the relay node. That was her target. She'd carried the override key since launch day, buried beneath her collarbone. Surgically implanted. Because if the Xyrek ever captured a ghost, they'd do worse than kill them. They'd strip their minds, strip their memories, strip their species down to blueprints. Which is why the key could only be accessed once. At the moment of detonation, she stepped out, drew her pulse rifle, and aimed for the sentry node. 1. Burst. Clean shot. The node exploded in a shower of white-hot circuitry. Alarms blared. Red spirals danced along the walls. The entire core chamber woke up. No more stealth now. She sprinted. 3 guards rounded the corner. 1 fired. The plasma bolt hit her side, shattered her cloaking, and tossed her against the conduit. She bit down a scream. Adrenaline surged. Training kicked in. She rolled, aimed, and returned fire to down. The 3rd ducked. She leapt up, slammed her shoulder into his chest, and emptied her pistol into his throat. Blood sizzled on the floor. She collapsed by the core's base. Panting, fingers shaking, she reached for her collarbone. The key. It slid out like a pin. Covered in biogel and heat-proof casing, she jammed it into the override panel. A voice asked, "Confirm detonation?" She stared at it. And then the real horror began. He was still alive. Commander Malik's voice buzzed in her comms. "Then abort. We're pulling fallback. Got survivors. We've cleared a corridor through sublevel 9. You have to move." She froze. "You said fall back," she whispered. "Not everyone's dead. Not yet. We've got 17 survivors, including civilians from the orbital prison. We're heading for evac." Nilla looked back at the core. The operation had always hinged on this. No survivors. Total sacrifice. One blast that made the war impossible to continue. But now, there were 17 people she could save. She stared at the console. "Confirm detonation?" She tapped her comm. "Sir, if I pull back now, we lose the core. I know, that's not your call. Orders just changed. Abort detonation. Rendezvous on 9. Her hand hovered over the panel. She could feel the radiation prickling against her skin already. The core was unstable. It would overload on its own in less than 20 minutes. But not big enough, not directed, without the failsafe. It had just burned this level. The war would go on. She had to choose. Save herself and the 17, or go through with it. She looked at the bodies around her, at the suit damage, the cracked helmet. There was no one else who could do this. The only way out was forward. She ray-rooted the override, changed the trigger, set the timer for 10 minutes. Then she picked up the rifle, disabled her comm, and started firing into the conduits above the core. Molten energy rained around her as the structure destabilized. Xyrek troops poured in from the hallway. She didn't stop, didn't flinch. She kept shooting until they overwhelmed her, until they swarmed like a wave, until her body hit the metal and the console blinked its final light. Detonation armed. 0 hours 9 minutes and 59 seconds. 10 minutes later, the entire continent disappeared in light. The shockwave ripped apart the station's remains, overloaded Xyrek comms, and caused a power vacuum in their invasion fleet. Command lost contact with hundreds of forward units. The operation was over. Humanity was still dying, but they had just become something else. Something more. Aftermath. The survivors made it off-world. Barely. Commander Malik never gave interviews, but the 17 refugees, many of whom had been imprisoned by the Zyric, did. They told the story of the woman in the reactor room, the one who could have escaped, who chose fire instead. They called her the Flameburn. Not many people remembered her name, but across alien systems, among enemy species who never thought humanity was more than desperate animals, her story passed like a secret prayer. The humans do not run, the humans do not yield, and when cornered, the humans choose fire. The dust hadn't settled from the last barrage. Not entirely. You could taste it in the recycled air. Even underground, Commander Juno had said it was better down here, safer, quieter, stable, but Merrick knew better. Quiet didn't mean safe. Quiet meant forgotten, and sometimes it meant dead. They were 33 now, down from 68 when they dropped to reinforce Bunker 7 near the Ashen Canyons. And if the intel was right, which it rarely was, they were the last holdout between the inner colonies and the Zero Hive expansion corridor. The rest of humanity had already made its choice. Pull back, they'd said. This front's lost, they'd said. But someone had to stay behind. Someone had to slow the swarm, and Juno, stubborn, bleeding, eyes dark with resolve, had volunteered. Merrick hadn't meant to stay, but he couldn't leave her. Not her. Not again. They had met on the Leviathan station 5 years ago. She was working in propulsion diagnostics. He was patched up from a botched orbital salvage op, holding his ribs and watching the stars through the bay window. She never said much back then, just handed him the med plast and left him to his breathing. But she came back the next night, and the next, and then one day, she didn't come alone. She brought an old song from Earth, something low and melancholic, and played it on an antique comm speaker. He still remembered the lyrics. A woman's voice, singing about oceans. He had never seen an ocean, but the way Juno looked while listening, that distant, wistful ache in her shoulders, made him want to give her one. Even now, even in hell, Bunker 7 was failing. Merrick's shoulder was half lamed from a kinetic blast 2 days ago, and the med supplies were nearly gone. Varric and Lynn had gone above ground to scout the emergency escape tunnels and hadn't come back. That left Juno, Merrick, and 11 others to hold the line. But tonight, Juno wasn't resting. She was in the eastern tunnel, staring at the wall. "You're not thinking of pulling the breach, are you?" Merrick asked as he limped up behind her. Juno didn't turn. "They're coming faster. The signals are getting stronger." He knew what that meant. Zero pulse language wasn't random. The brighter and more complex the pattern, the closer the swarm. "We're down to a few arc charges and manual blades," he said. "If you're thinking about holding, then I'm not holding." Juno exhaled. "I'm sealing it. Everyone else will evacuate through the thermal exhaust shaft." Merrick's jaw locked. "You mean just you?" She turned now, her face unreadable. "It's the only way. The breach points to narrow for more than one." "I'll go." "No." Her voice wasn't angry. It was final, quiet, like a door closing. "Juno, I already gave my word, Merrick. I sent my oath to command. I recorded it. Time-stamped. This is my operation now. My life for this delay." He stared at her and saw it. Beneath the calm, the grief, the weariness, he wanted to argue. He wanted to scream. But he had stayed because of her. And he knew now there was no changing this. But maybe he could give her something more than silence. They spent their last hour together in the service tunnel, not speaking, just sitting against opposite walls, passing an old ration bar between them like it was a bottle of wine. "You ever see the sea?" he asked finally. Juno smiled faintly. "Once, when I was 12, South Coast. The water was green, not blue." He nodded. "I used to think I'd die in space. No gravity, no sound. You still might." She murmured, and her smile didn't fade. They looked at each other, and that was when he crawled closer, his hand touching hers. Her calloused fingers closed around his like she'd done it before, like it was a habit they'd just forgotten. He leaned his forehead to hers. "I love you, you know." "I know." And for the first time in years, her voice cracked. Juno went to the breach tunnel just after shift change. Merrick watched her back until the darkness swallowed her. He didn't sleep. He didn't move. And then, when the alarms began, the tremor sensors ringing, The swarm approaching, he made his decision. He sprinted into the northern shaft, not away from the breach, but up and around, through the collapsed furnace ductwork, past the irradiated venting tubes, through places the Zero wouldn't expect. He reached the upper end of the breach tunnel with 5 minutes to spare. She was already prepping the discharges. "Go," she said without turning. "No." Her shoulders stiffened. "Don't make me order you. You already did," he whispered, "and I already disobeyed." She turned now, and he saw it, fear. "You'll die. So will you?" She opened her mouth, but he was already moving, already helping set the final charge. And then he was next to her, facing the dark together, their hands bloody, but held tightly. "If we're going to die," he whispered, "then let it mean something." Juno didn't reply, but she didn't let go. The Zero came in waves, claws, carapace, bone saws, and sonic shrieks. Juno and Marek held them off for 29 minutes. Enough time. Enough for the others to escape. At minute 30, the detonation failed. Something had shorted in the wiring. The trigger was useless. Juno looked at Marek. Marek looked at her. She reached for the backup, a thermal pack and manual spark rod. It would work, but it had to be done manually. He reached out. She stopped him. "Let me, together," he said, and this time, she didn't argue. They pressed the charge into place, kissed once through the flickering light, and when the tunnel exploded, it echoed for miles. They were listed as Kier. No bodies were recovered. But 6 weeks later, an alien merchant caravan passing through the Ashen Canyons stopped at a memorial shrine. Built by the evacuees, the merchant claimed that the air smelled faintly like ocean salt. And the wind carried a woman's song. They were down to three of the original team, if you could still call them that, remained alive after the breach. The sacrifice, the planetary descent, and the gauntlet of alien bioweapons. The station's core reactor was ready to go critical, and the alien fleet, awakened too late, had already started to converge. Tanis limped through the humming corridors, her shoulder cauterized from a plasma burn, her side soaked in blood. Every breath felt like fire in her ribs, but she didn't stop. Behind her, Corin and Elias followed. Equally worn, Corin's helmet was cracked, visor darkened by soot, and Elias's breathing came in short, wet gasps from a punctured rebreather. But they had made it. They'd reached the central detonation room. It was time. "You know what this means," Tanis said, barely above a whisper. No one answered. They didn't have to. The core's energy was unstable but primed. If they set the timing just right, the detonation would implode the singularity that powered the station, taking the enemy fleet, the signal ray, and the station's mind with it. But it had to be triggered manually. Someone had to stay. Corin leaned back against the console, a heavy stillness settling in his eyes. He looked at Elias, then at Tanis. "I'll do it," he said. But Elias shook his head. "No, it should be me. I'm already not going to make it." He coughed, red blooming against the inside of his helmet. "I can't even run. You do. Go. You can still make the jump." Tanis clenched her jaw. This wasn't how it was supposed to end. They were supposed to plant the seed, blow the station, and vanish, ghosts in the record. Names never spoken but eternally remembered by those who remained. "No," she said. "None of us deserve this alone. We vote. One stays. To leave." Corin nodded. Elias smiled. "You always were the idealist." They placed their gloved hands against the core chamber. 3 lights blinked. One would dim. Elias's light remained. Corin turned away, his hand trembling. Tanis stood frozen. "No," she began, but Elias was already typing. "Don't you dare. I've locked it. System override. I knew you'd argue." He turned to her, glassy-eyed and pale. "Tanis, you saved us back at the comm relay. You shot that war-born thing in the throat. You've earned your chance." "So did Corin." "Me." He laughed bitterly. "I've always been the coward. Let me die brave. Just this once." She stepped forward, furious, heartbroken, but he pressed a button and a blast shield descended, separating them. "I'm sorry," Elias said, placing a hand against the glass. "Tell Earth I remembered her sky. Tell her I loved it." Then the hallway behind them started to collapse. Corin pulled her away, and they ran. Fire bloomed behind them. The reactor began its final countdown. Red lights flared. Alarms screamed. Bulkheads closed. The whole world trembled. They reached the outer ring. The escape pod, one of the few left, stood open, its engines primed. Tanis collapsed into the seat, teeth clenched so tight she thought they'd break. Elias's voice still rang in her ear. "Let me die brave." Corin strapped in and slammed the launch controls. "Hold on," he said. The pod ejected into space just as the station collapsed in on itself. There was no explosion. Not at first. Instead, the singularity bent the very shape of the stars around it. A dome of white light surged outward, swallowing the alien fleet, fracturing their warships into pieces of light. A silence spread over the cosmos like a breath held. Then light, then nothing. They drifted for days. Communications were jammed. Navigation dead. Just a pod in blackness, heading nowhere. Corin barely spoke. Tanis watched the stars and waited for death. Then a voice, crackling, faint, but human. "Pod 96. Identify. You're not supposed to be out here." She laughed. "They were picked up by a civilian mining ship orbiting an unregistered moon." The pilot looked stunned when he saw them, burned, bleeding, barely alive. What the hell? You're from that ghost station. You're from that mission." Tanis just nodded. They never gave their names, only the coordinates. 10 years later, a garden floated in orbit above a neutral zone. Near the shattered star of Dalker 7, a monument stood at its heart, a blade made of fused ship metal, etched with the words, "They never asked for glory. They asked for time." Underneath it, a name had been recently added. Elias Wren. A child touched the plaque and looked up at her mother. "Did they win, Mama?" Tanis, older now, gray in her hair, her arm a cybernetic replacement, knelt beside her. "No, they didn't win." She smiled softly. "They ended it." Across the galaxy, alien tongues whispered the name of the operation as myth. Some called it the human last fire, others the silent starfall. But all knew this: humanity, fragile and finite, had walked into death to stop a greater one, and in doing so, they had become more than a species. They had become a story. An echo in every star.